Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into the world of Andalusian Jews during Islamic rule in Spain.
Fascinating period.
It really is. We've got some excerpts from an academic paper here. It really highlights their contributions to science and culture. You know, we're talking flourishing communities, powerful figures, intellectual exchange that really changed Europe.
A lot to unpack there.
There is, and I think listeners will be surprised by some of what we find. So are you ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, perfect. So often when we think about Jewish history in Europe, it's a story of hardship.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's often the case. Even centuries before the time period we're looking at, life wasn't easy for Jewish communities. Lots of restrictions, discrimination, especially as Christianity rose to prominence.
Right. And this paper points to the Council of Elvira in 320 AD as a real turning point, the first real restrictions on Jewish people in the Roman Empire. It's almost like a foreshadowing of the challenges to come.
Exactly. And things really escalated from there. The Byzantine Emperor Heraclius, in the 7th century, he banned Judaism entirely. Forced conversions, exile. Wow.
That's a grim picture.
It is. Then in Visigoth Spain, even though things started out relatively peacefully, King Arius's conversion to Catholicism changed everything.
Oh yeah, big time.
Suddenly, Judaism's outlawed the Jewish community faced intense discrimination. So, really understanding this historical context, it makes the flourishing of Jewish life in Andalusia under Islamic rule even more remarkable.
Yeah, the contrast is striking.
It is. So let's talk about that. What was life actually like for Jews under Islamic rule in Andalusia? Because this paper paints a very different picture.
It does. While their fellow Jews were facing persecution elsewhere, Andalusian Jews experienced a level of freedom and prosperity that was really rare. They were free to practice their faith openly. No threat of forced conversion.
Huge difference compared to what was happening in other parts of Europe.
Absolutely. And the paper goes on to say that slavery was abolished for Jews in Andalusia. They were recognized as a distinct religious community with their own legal system.
Okay.
They were active participants in society, holding high-ranking positions in court even. Wait, hold on. You're telling me there were Jewish viziers and court officials?
Oh yeah. We're talking doctors, counselors, advisors. They weren't just tolerated, they were valued members of society.
Wow. This was clearly more than just tolerance. This sounds like a true partnership.
I think that's a great way to put it, and it goes even deeper. The paper argues that Andalusian Jews became essential cultural intermediaries. They bridged the gap between the Muslim and Christian worlds.
Okay, that's fascinating. How were they doing that?
Well, think about it. They were fluent in multiple languages.
Right, makes sense.
They could serve as interpreters, negotiators for Muslim rulers in their dealings with Christian Europe.
So navigating complex political landscapes using their linguistic skills.
Exactly. But it went beyond just politics. They were translating Arabic texts into Latin and Hebrew, introducing Europe to Islamic philosophy, science, literature.
It was like a period of intense intellectual exchange.
It was, and facilitated in large part by these Andalusian Jewish scholars.
So they weren't just transmitting information, they were really shaping the intellectual landscape of Europe.
Hugely significant.
It is. So many Greek philosophical and scientific works that had been lost to Europe. They were preserved and translated into Arabic in the Islamic world.
Right.
And then thanks to these Andalusian Jews, they were translated into Latin, making their way back into Europe.
Exactly. It's incredible.
It's like they were the missing link, rediscovering ancient wisdom and making it accessible to a whole new audience.
That's a great way to think about it. Their role in preserving and transmitting knowledge is a crucial part of their legacy.
And it's all tied to this incredible Judeo-Arabic culture that blossomed in Andalusia.
Right.
So what exactly was that? I'm imagining a fascinating blend of traditions.
Absolutely. Picture this Jewish scholars, fluent in Arabic, fully immersed in the intellectual life of Andalusia, studying alongside Muslim students, absorbing knowledge, and then weaving it all together with their own Hebrew heritage.
Creating something truly unique.
A unique cultural fusion. The paper specifically mentions Hasdai B. Shaprut as a pivotal figure.
Right.
He was a major figure in the Caliphate of Cordoba, wasn't he?
He was physician, translator, customs inspector, eventually a de facto vizier. He was basically the caliph of Cordoba's right-hand man.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, powerful figure. What made him so important to this Judeo-Arabic culture, though?
He was a patron of Jewish scholars. He negotiated with foreign dignitaries, but his most lasting impact was establishing a major Talmudic academy in Cordoba.
So Cordoba became a major center of Jewish learning.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's just one example of the flourishing intellectual life we're talking about. This period also saw a blossoming of Hebrew literature, heavily inspired by Arabic literary traditions.
So Hebrew poetry adopting Arabic forms and themes.
Absolutely. Even more religious and philosophical works were being written in Arabic. Imagine that Arabic becoming more than just a language of everyday communication.
Right.
It was a language of scholarship.
High culture.
Like weaving together these two worlds,
Yeah.
creating something entirely new and innovative. Exactly. A testament to the intellectual vibrancy of this period. And this fusion of cultures is evident in the work of many scholars, including the great Maimonides, who wrote some of his most influential works in Arabic.
It's mind-blowing to think about how intertwined these cultures were.
Yeah.
What about the influence of Andalusian Jews on language itself?
Oh, that's a big one. Get ready for this. Andalusian Jewish scholars made groundbreaking contributions to the study of Hebrew grammar, all thanks to their deep understanding of Arabic linguistics.
Wow, so they weren't just learning from Arabic, they were using that knowledge to transform their understanding of Hebrew.
Precisely.
Tell me more about these linguistic pioneers.
Oh, there's so many fascinating figures. We could start with Yehuda Hayush. In the 10th century, he revolutionized how we understand Hebrew verb structure. His work was written in Arabic, and it laid the groundwork for modern Hebrew grammar.
So he's like the father of modern Hebrew grammar?
Pretty much. And then there's Yonah B. Jana. Another scholar from Cordoba wrote a comprehensive Hebrew grammar, also in Arabic, showcasing their deep linguistic expertise. They were translating complex Arabic literary works into Hebrew,
Wow.
showing just how skilled they were.
So it seems like a pattern is emerging here. These Andalusian Jews weren't just passively absorbing knowledge, they were actively engaging, translating, adapting, pushing the boundaries of their own intellectual traditions.
You've hit the nail on the head. It was a truly dynamic period of cross-cultural fertilization, and these scholars were at the forefront. And their impact wasn't limited to linguistics. They made significant contributions to literature, philosophy, medicine,
Right.
shaping intellectual life, not only in Andalusia, but far beyond.
It's amazing how much we've already covered. We started with the hardships faced by Jews in Europe. Now we're seeing this incredible flourishing in Andalusia, their impact on language, their cultural contributions. It's so much more than I ever imagined.
It's a rich and complex history, full of fascinating stories.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
Absolutely.
So we talked about this intellectual fusion happening in Andalusia, especially with language. But what about literature? We touched on the fact that Hebrew literature was really blossoming during this period. Did Andalusian Jews have their own Shakespeare or Jane Austen?
Maybe not in those exact terms, but they certainly had some incredibly talented poets and writers. And you're right, their work was deeply influenced by Arabic literary traditions. But remember, they weren't simply copying, they were adapting and innovating, creating something uniquely their own.
So it was more of a cultural exchange, a give and take that resulted in something new and exciting.
Precisely. The paper highlights some key figures who were really spearheading this literary revolution. One of the earliest was Dinesh B. Labrat, a 10th century poet who had the audacity to adapt Arabic poetic meters into Hebrew.
Ooh, I can imagine that wasn't without controversy.
You're absolutely right. He was accused of corrupting the Hebrew language, but his influence was undeniable. He really pushed the boundaries of what Hebrew poetry could be.
So a true trailblazer. Who else stands out from this period?
Well, there's Ishmael B. Nagdella, a renowned poet. He also served as an advisor to the emir in Granada. Talking about a multi-talented individual.
Poet and a political advisor. This guy was a major player.
He was. His poems demonstrate a mastery of both Hebrew and Arabic poetic traditions.
Wow. No, I remember we talked about Solomon B. Gabirol earlier, the philosopher whose work had such a wide reach. Was he also involved in the literary scene?
Oh, he was. And not just as a dabbler. He was a brilliant poet. His work was deeply influenced by Sufi themes, showcasing again this incredible cross-cultural pollination happening in Andalusia.
So Jewish mysticism blending with Islamic Sufi thought, all expressed through the beauty of Hebrew poetry?
Exactly.
That's mind-blowing. It seems like poetry was a real strength for Andalusian Jews.
It truly was. And we can't forget Yehuda Halevi, often considered the heart of medieval Jewish poetry.
Right, yeah.
He explored themes of love, faith, exile. In both secular and religious poems, his work is still celebrated today. And interestingly, he was also a philosopher. He authored a famous work called Kuzari.
Wait a minute. So he was a prominent poet and a philosopher. This guy was a true Renaissance man centuries before the Renaissance.
He was a remarkable individual. To round out our poetic tour, we have Yehuda al-Harizi. He was not only a gifted poet himself, but also a prolific translator.
So making these works accessible to a wider audience, spreading knowledge through translation.
Exactly. He translated philosophical works from Arabic to Hebrew. He even adapted Arabic poetry into Hebrew, bringing those ideas to a whole new audience, and this act of translation, making knowledge accessible. It was a common thread throughout this period.
Yeah, it really seems to be. It's incredible how much they contributed to the sharing of knowledge and ideas. It makes you wonder what was driving this intellectual energy. Why was there this sudden flourishing of philosophical thought after the Islamic conquest?
It's a great question. Remember, under Islamic rule, Jews were free to engage in intellectual pursuits. They had access to this rich philosophical tradition that had been developing in the Islamic world. It was like opening a door to a whole new world of ideas.
Makes sense. This freedom and access to new ideas would naturally spark a philosophical revival. So who are some of the leading figures in this movement?
Well, one of the earliest and most influential was Ibn Gabirol. His book, The Fountain of Life, explored creation, the soul, so much more. It became a cornerstone of medieval philosophical thought, influencing both Jewish and Christian thinkers.
So his ideas were reaching far beyond just the Jewish community.
Absolutely. And then you have Ibn Battuta, whose work, Duties of the Heart, focused on moral philosophy and ethical living.
Okay.
It's like a practical guide to living a righteous life, something that would have resonated with people from all walks of life.
It sounds like a self-help book for the soul, centuries before self-help books were even a thing.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And as we move into the 12th century, we encounter some truly towering figures, like Yehuda Halevi.
Back to Yehuda Halevi again.
Yes, the poet. Remember his philosophical work, Kuzari, that we mentioned earlier? It's still studied today. And Abraham Hanassi, he was a pioneer in both mathematics and philosophy, translating scientific works from Arabic to Latin, writing on various religious and philosophical themes.
So a key figure in transmitting knowledge between the Islamic and Christian worlds.
Absolutely. And let's not forget another polymath, Abraham B. Ezra. He wrote on religion, philosophy, astronomy, medicine, linguistics, you name it.
It's hard to believe one person could be so knowledgeable about so many different fields.
Truly remarkable. Now, the paper also mentions two other major figures from this period, Abraham B. Dodd and Moses B. Maimonides.
Okay.
What made them stand out? They were both intellectual giants of Jewish history. Abraham B. Dodd was known for his work on Jewish law and philosophy. He was instrumental in introducing Aristotle's ideas to the Jewish world. And as for Maimonides, he was a true Renaissance man, writing on a vast array of subjects.
Wow.
Philosophy, medicine, astronomy, Jewish law. His Guide for the Perplexed is still considered a masterpiece of medieval Jewish thought.
So we've covered poets, philosophers, linguists, mathematicians. It's almost like Andalusian Jews were making significant contributions to every field imaginable. And speaking of contributions, the paper spends quite a bit of time highlighting their impact on medicine. I'm curious what drew them to this particular field.
It's a fascinating question. There are a few possible explanations. One is that Jewish religious law placed a strong emphasis on health and well-being.
Okay.
So that may have fostered a natural interest in medicine. Another possibility is that as a minority group, Jews often faced barriers to entering other professions. So medicine might have been a more viable option.
So a combination of cultural values and practical reality.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that Jewish involvement in medicine wasn't something new. It goes back centuries, even to the early days of the Islamic Empire. They were actively translating medical texts from Syriac to Arabic, laying the groundwork for the development of Islamic medicine, which would later heavily influence European medicine.
So they were involved in the transmission of medical knowledge from the very beginning.
Essential to that process. And once the Andalusian Umayyad state was established, Jewish medical scholarship truly flourished. They were writing their own medical text, translating works from Arabic and Greek, serving as physicians to both Muslim and Christian rulers.
It's amazing how they seamlessly navigated these different cultural spheres, acting as bridges between the Muslim and Christian worlds. The paper mentions a figure named Isaac Israel as an important early Jewish medical writer. What was his contribution?
He was one of the first Jewish physicians to gain recognition for his medical writings. His work helped to shape early Jewish medical scholarship. He was also deeply involved in the translation movement, helping to make Greek and Syriac medical texts accessible to a wider audience.
Again, we see that theme of translation, transmission, integration of knowledge. It really does seem to be the hallmark of Andalusian Jewish scholarship.
You're absolutely right. They were actively shaping and disseminating knowledge, not simply receiving it passively. And this is especially evident in their medical contributions.
So tell me, what were some of the specific ways in which they influenced the medical field? Did they make any groundbreaking discoveries or develop new treatments?
Well, as we've already touched on, their role as physicians to rulers gave them a certain level of influence and prestige, but their impact went far beyond that. They were instrumental in the establishment of medical schools in Europe.
Wait, Jewish physicians were involved in setting up medical schools in Europe?
As the Christian reconquest of Spain progressed, many Jewish scholars, including physicians, migrated to other parts of Europe, taking their knowledge and expertise with them. They played key roles in founding medical schools in places like Salerno, Padua, Bologna, Lunel, Montpellier, which would become some of the most important centers of medical learning in Europe.
Wow, so not only were they preserving and transmitting medical knowledge, but they were also helping to create the very institutions that would train future generations of doctors.
Exactly. Their influence extended to shaping medical curricula and bringing a wealth of medical texts, many translated from Arabic and Greek, to these burgeoning institutions. They were shaping the future of European medicine in a very tangible way.
It's mind-blowing to think that their legacy extends that far. It makes you wonder, did their work help lay the foundation for the scientific revolution that would later transform Europe?
It's a compelling argument. Their contributions to science, culture, and intellectual exchange had a profound and lasting impact.
This deep dive is really highlighting just how vital they were in bridging the gap between the Islamic and Christian worlds. It makes you wonder how history might have unfolded differently without their contributions.
That's a great point, and it's something we'll explore further in the final part of our deep dive. We still need to discuss the broader implications of this period and consider how these events resonate even today. But before we do that, let's take a moment to appreciate the incredible intellectual energy and cultural richness of this extraordinary period in history.
We've been on quite a journey through the world of Andalusian Jews, haven't we? From persecution to prosperity, cultural exchange, intellectual innovation. It's a story full of twists and turns.
It really is. Yeah. And it speaks to their resilience and adaptability.
Absolutely. But beyond the fascinating details, I think there's a bigger story here, right? What does this all tell us about how knowledge is created and shared, how cultures interact, how ideas flow throughout history?
That's a great point. Their story really challenges a lot of our assumptions about these things. We often think of knowledge transmission as a one-way street.
Right. From more advanced cultures to less developed ones.
Exactly. But the Andalusian experience shows us that it's much more complex than that.
Yeah, it wasn't just a simple transfer from the Islamic world to Europe. These Jewish scholars were actively translating, interpreting, adapting ideas, making them their own, and then sharing them in new ways.
Precisely. They were shaping the intellectual landscape through their work. And it highlights something really important, the interconnectedness of cultures. The Andalusian experience reminds us that knowledge creation is often a collaborative and cross-cultural process.
It's like a giant web of ideas with threads connecting different cultures in different times.
Yeah.
And these Jewish scholars were weaving those threads together, creating something new and beautiful.
I like that. And speaking of interconnectedness, the paper talks about how these scholars introduced Islamic thought to Christian Europe. I imagine that had a pretty significant impact.
Especially at the time, because Europe had a pretty negative view of Islam back then.
Right, fueled by religious and political conflicts.
Exactly.
So Islam was often seen as this hostile other.
Right.
But these Andalusian Jewish scholars, they offered a much more nuanced view. Through their translations, through their interactions, they highlighted its rich intellectual tradition.
They showed a different side of Islam.
They did, highlighting its contributions to science, philosophy, the arts.
It's like they were humanizing Islam for a European audience that had largely demonized it.
It's a powerful way to think about it. They challenged stereotypes. They opened minds. And their work actually helped pave the way for the European Renaissance.
Wow, really? How so?
Well, the Renaissance was all about rediscovering classical knowledge.
Right.
And a lot of that knowledge came from Arabic translations of Greek texts. Translations done by, you guessed it, Jewish scholars in Andalusia.
Incredible.
Their work helped reintroduce Europe to the wisdom of the ancients.
It's amazing to think that this relatively small group of scholars had such a huge impact on the course of history.
It really is.
Yeah.
And their story underscores another important point. The power of language. We've talked about how these scholars were fluent in multiple languages, Hebrew, Arabic, Latin, Spanish.
Right.
That linguistic mastery was essential to their success as translators, as scholars, as cultural mediators.
Like they had multiple keys to unlock the doors of knowledge.
Exactly. Their story reminds us that language can bridge divides. It can facilitate communication. It can open up new worlds of understanding. It's a powerful tool, and these scholars wielded it masterfully.
So taking a step back, what does all of this mean for us today? What can we learn from the experience of Andalusian Jews all these centuries later?
Well, their story is full of valuable lessons. First and foremost, it reminds us of the power of cultural exchange. When cultures interact, When they share ideas, incredible things can happen. New knowledge is created. Perspectives are broadened. Innovation flourishes.
And we can't forget the importance of preserving and transmitting knowledge.
Absolutely. These scholars were dedicated to keeping that flame of knowledge alive.
Right.
Translating texts, building libraries, passing their wisdom down to future generations.
It's a powerful legacy.
It is. And lastly, their story highlights the vital role that individuals can play in bridging divides and fostering understanding. Even in a world marked by conflict and division, individuals can make a difference by reaching across boundaries, building connections, promoting dialogue.
It's a powerful and inspiring message. It shows that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can triumph and create something truly remarkable.
And it reminds us that diversity isn't just a feel-good concept. It's a source of strength and innovation.
Well said. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. We journeyed back in time, explored a vibrant and influential culture, uncovered lessons that resonate even today.
It's been a pleasure.
As always. And to our listeners, I encourage you to continue exploring. Delve deeper into this rich tapestry of history. There are countless stories waiting to be discovered.
Oh, yeah.
Stories of cultural exchange, intellectual brilliance, and the enduring legacy of knowledge. Until next time, keep diving deep.